This war isn't being fought only with missiles. It's being funded by ships you will never see. In the black water of the world's oceans, a hidden armada moves like ghosts. 600 tankers. No flag that matters. No transparency. No mercy. And inside that fleet is the most dangerous financial pipeline on Earth. A system that can feed up to 40% of Russia's war budget, not through banks, but through oil. Every single day, roughly 7.5 million barrels slip through cracks in the global order. Signals vanish, AIS goes dark, cargo shifts mid-sea, paperwork lies, insurance becomes a weapon. But now something has changed, because Ukraine isn't just hitting targets, it's hunting the bloodstream of the war. If you want to understand what happens next, before markets and governments panic, subscribe and ask yourself this: what happens when the world starts striking the ships that keep a war alive? For years, the world believed modern sanctions worked like a switch. You flip it, a country loses money, the war slows down. But Russia didn't just survive sanctions, it redesigned the entire game. It built a parallel oil economy, a moving network of tankers, middlemen, ports, paperwork, and quiet deals, not to win headlines, to win time, to keep cash flowing even when the doors were supposed to be shut. That's why the Shadow Fleet matters, because it isn't a side story. It's the core engine. If even a fraction of those exports get disrupted, the effect is immediate. Not next year, not after elections, immediately. And here's the deeper issue. Once a war is funded through invisible logistics, the battlefield becomes global, because every ship route becomes a pressure point, every insurance contract becomes leverage, and every strike on a tanker becomes a signal to the entire world economy. Now we need to understand one thing. How did this system get built in the first place? The Shadow Fleet didn't appear overnight. It was born from a predictable cycle. Pressure creates adaptation, and adaptation creates a new system. When sanctions tightened, Russia faced a simple equation: either accept a slow financial suffocation or invent a way to export oil without being seen. And oil isn't just a commodity in this story. Oil is the currency of war. It pays salaries, it buys drones, it keeps factories running, it keeps the state breathing. So Russia did what every blocked power eventually does. It shifted the battlefield from armies to logistics. A new pipeline formed across oceans instead of borders. Tankers moved through third-party routes. Cargo blended. Transfers happened mid-sea. Signals disappeared when they had to. And over time, what started as a workaround became an industry. A floating supply chain designed to resist pressure. Not by being stronger, but by being harder to track. But every system like this has one weakness. It works only as long as the world treats it like an annoyance, not a target. That's why the first explosion mattered, because it signaled a shift from containment to confrontation. Then the ocean stopped being background noise and turned into a front line. Because Ukraine's sea drones didn't just hit a ship, they hit the idea that this fleet was untouchable. When a tanker gets struck, it's not only steel that cracks, it's confidence. The Shadow Fleet runs on one invisible fuel: belief. Belief that routes stay open. Belief that insurers will look away. Belief that buyers will keep buying. Belief that nobody wants to risk escalation at sea. But after the first wave of hits, that belief starts to wobble. Suddenly, every captain becomes nervous. Every operator becomes cautious, every middleman raises the price, and every cheap barrel begins to carry a hidden premium. This is how disruption spreads, not through speeches, through hesitation, through delays, through fear. And here's the part most people miss. Even one successful strike sends a message louder than any sanction, because it proves the war's money pipeline can bleed. If you want Part 7 to hit hardest later, Remember this moment. The first crack is always small, then the entire structure starts to shift. Now we have to look under the surface. What is the system actually made of? Here's the hidden mechanism. The shadow fleet isn't just illegal shipping, it's a financial architecture, a moving machine that turns oil into war money while hiding the fingerprints. It works because it uses 3 layers of camouflage. First, invisibility. Ships switch off AIS, routes become guesses, tracking becomes delayed. Second, confusion. Oil doesn't travel like a clean line from A to B. It gets blended, relabeled, transferred mid-sea through STS operations. So the origin becomes unclear on paper. Third, insulation, not from missiles, from consequences. Insurance, ownership, and responsibility get fragmented across shell companies and distant jurisdictions. And this is why sanctions alone struggle, because sanctions target a country. This system targets loopholes. It's not built to defeat the world in a fair fight. It's built to exhaust the world's attention span, to outlast outrage, to make enforcement expensive and messy. But this machine has a fragile dependency. It needs constant movement, constant trust, constant access to ports, buyers, and contracts. And once drones start threatening that motion, the system doesn't slowly weaken, it snaps. Which brings us to the second escalation. The moment the battlefield moved from tankers to infrastructure. Because the war doesn't end at sea, it continues on land where the oil becomes usable power. Refineries, storage hubs, export terminals. And Ukraine understood something ruthless. You don't have to sink every tanker. You just have to make the system unstable. So the escalation came fast. Tankers hit, then infrastructure burned, and suddenly the shadow fleet wasn't just being watched, it was being hunted. Now every barrel faces 2 dangers, one on the ocean, one at the destination. That creates a chain reaction. If refineries get damaged, exports stumble. If exports stumble, revenue drops. If revenue drops, the state tightens control. And when control tightens, civilians pay first. This is where wars become economic earthquakes, because oil isn't only Russia's lifeline. Oil is the nervous system of global pricing. A few drone strikes can ripple into premiums, delays, and fear. And fear is a multiplier. It raises costs even before supply disappears. So now the world faces a new kind of pressure. Not just can sanctions work, but can this war economy survive targeted disruption? And if it can't, you already know what happens next. Because the first people to feel it won't be generals. It will be you. And this is the part nobody wants to admit. Wars don't hit your life through headlines. They hit you through receipts. Because when oil logistics break, prices don't wait for confirmation. They move on fear. They move on expectation. They move before you even understand why. So imagine being you on a normal morning. You're not tracking tankers. You're not reading sanctions policy. You're just trying to live. Then your fuel costs more. Your groceries creep up. Your bills tighten. Your paycheck feels smaller without anything dramatic happening in your city. That's how global systems punish ordinary people. Quietly, relentlessly. And if you're in a country already under inflation pressure, the shock hits harder. Because you don't have spare room. You don't have buffers. This isn't just geopolitics. This is stress inside kitchens. This is anxiety inside families. If you've ever felt like the world is becoming more expensive for no reason, this is one of the reasons. So if you want more breakdowns like this, clear, sharp, and real, support the channel. Because understanding the system is how you stop feeling powerless. Now zoom out. Because this doesn't stay personal, it becomes global. Now zoom out, because the shadow fleet isn't only Russia's trick. It's a warning to every major power watching. This is what happens when the global order gets divided into 2 economies. One visible, one deniable. And the moment drones start striking tankers, the message goes global. Shipping lanes are no longer neutral. That changes calculations for everyone: importers, insurers, ports, energy traders. Because once the ocean becomes a battlefield, the risk premium spreads like a virus. It moves faster than diplomacy, and it reaches countries that never fired a shot. This is how a regional war becomes a global stress test, not through ideology, through logistics. And geopolitically, it forces brutal choices. Do governments tighten enforcement and risk disruption, or look away and normalize a shadow economy that funds war? Either path is dangerous. One risks a sudden economic shock. The other risks a slow moral collapse of the rules-based system. And when rules stop working, power fills the gap. Not law, not treaties, power. So the world is drifting toward a new reality, where supply chains become weapons, and energy security becomes national security. Which brings us to the hardest part. What happens next isn't one outcome, it's three. So let's talk about the future, not as prediction, as scenarios, because systems like this don't break in one direction. They branch. Scenario one, the controlled squeeze. The shadow fleet keeps moving, but at higher cost. More delays, more risk premiums, more quiet enforcement. Russia earns less, but enough to survive. The war drags on. Markets stay tense, but not panicked. This is the world choosing stability over resolution. Scenario 2, the cracking pipeline. Strikes increase, insurance tightens, ports hesitate, middlemen vanish, export volumes shrink faster than expected, revenues fall, and the system starts feeding on itself, raising cost, reducing trust, accelerating collapse. This is the war economy weakening without a formal defeat. Scenario 3, the ocean shock. A major disruption triggers fear across energy markets. Prices spike, governments scramble, and escalation becomes unpredictable because nobody wants to look weak. This is the global economy paying the price for a war it didn't start. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The future won't be decided by speeches. It will be decided by logistics, by risk tolerance, by how far the world is willing to go to stop a system built on denial. So now we reach the final insight, because the shadow fleet isn't just about Russia, it's about what the world has become, and that's the real story. This isn't just a war of territory, it's a war of systems, a war where money doesn't travel through banks, it travels through waves, through contracts, through ships that disappear and reappear like ghosts. The shadow fleet proves something brutal. When pressure rises, the world doesn't always become cleaner. Sometimes it becomes smarter at hiding, and that should scare you. Because once a shadow economy becomes normal, it never stays contained. It spreads, it gets copied, it becomes the blueprint for every future conflict. So the question isn't only whether Russia can keep exporting, the question is whether the global order can survive a world where enforcement is optional and accountability is negotiable. If you felt something click today, if this finally made the chaos make sense, then don't just watch and move on. Like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you think is coming next. A controlled squeeze, a cracking pipeline, or an ocean shock. Because in the next episode we're going deeper. We'll map the pressure points that could trigger the next global spike and the one decision that could turn this shadow war into a worldwide economic crisis. Stay sharp, because the next headline will not explain the real mechanism, but now you can.